You know what I'm sick of? Isekais. Ignore those. But seriously, how come every new fantasy series that I read has some type of isekai, reverse isekai, system or random magic tower that's somehow integral to the story for some reason? It's always the same. I love the fantasy trope and I want something new. I want something fresh, something oh God, that is so much death. Please, I want to read this one. Towers are starting to get on my nerves. Yeah, hunters, monsters, skills, abilities, ranks, and whatever else you want or desire. But wait, there's more. As long as you look hard enough, at least. Anything from rags to riches, F to S rank stories, or dungeons and stuff. There's too many of these series and too many of these tropes. So, how do you make a twist on a genre that's already about twists? The reverse isekai is already a thing. The opposite isekai? Hey Siri? Okay, so I have no idea if this trope has a name, but we're dealing with three types of tropes. The isekai, when a normal, everyday person, usually through some manner of death, sometimes a truck, gets magically yeeted into a fantasy world. Meanwhile, the reverse isekai is when a fantasy world gets control pasted into the real world. But what about not that? There are a small handful of series that focus on not the fantasy world, but one fantasy creature, either a knight or a demon king or even a monster, getting thrown into a human body, becoming a normal, everyday person. I would call this the reverse isekai, but that's already a thing for some reason. Please let me know if this is actually already a trope and I'm just dumb. But the point being, what if instead of grabbing a normal everyday person and throwing them into a fantasy world, we grab not just some fantasy person, not even some fantasy monster, but the boss of a fantasy tower, taking some elements from normal reverse isekais and other isekais in the fantasy genre and adding so much more. With only 3 episodes while writing this, I was the final boss, delivers on all of that and more. We follow Baphomet. Yeah, that's Baphomet, the deity and also, I think, sometimes Final Fantasy boss. As the title suggests, Baphomet is the final boss of the tower. A tower that we really don't get to see all that much, mainly because we follow the final boss. A majority of the first chapter is not only seeing the world through Baphomet's eyes, but seeing the life of a final boss, trapped in a room. His only contact and connection with the outside world is the hordes of adventurers that try and take his life. Emphasis on try, though, as we see a numerous amount of adventurers, from a holy knight driven by his faith, to an old man with some backstory that's pretty sad, I imagine, to April May as an adventurer, gets absolutely destroyed by our final boss. Our story isn't about those adventurers, or really about most adventurers. Instead, it's about our final boss. Not this embodiment of evil who relishes in crushing his enemies under his heel. Not this boss that wants to take over the world. Granted, he does call adventurers that he faces his toys, but he's not this mindless monster, not one driven by pure evil or hatred. In fact, we hear him explain that adventurers coming to fight is an event that brings me the most joys, and also my greatest despair. Baphomet is powerful. He's the final boss of this dungeon. Of course he's powerful. He has to be. But like I said, he's trapped. No matter how strong or powerful he is, he can never escape. He can never be where the people are. Or I guess where his toys are. His life is a prison, a place where he's trapped forever, never being able to escape or leave, never being able to be free. Already, I'm so interested in this story because it's a boss with feelings, with emotions, with desires. Sure, he looks like a demon goat, but he's grown weary and tired of waiting for the next fight. there's just something about the final boss getting bored that I just desperately love. Something about him being his own individual, his own person, that I just find really cool. Like when he gets so bored that he has to try to use his smartphone to burn time. There's just something so human about wanting more than fighting and combats. Something so real about this desire to go see the world, to experience something new and something exciting. Anyways, after the most relatable moment, having his phone run out of batteries, the strongest adventurer approaches, reminding me a lot of Yu Huan from My S-Class Hunters, with a very cool sword and very cool blue fire. During a really cool battle between the two, Baphomet is loving the battle, but there's something in him that's making him not quite enjoy every moment of this battle. There's something in him that gets jealous of this hunter, not by this hunter's strength or his power, even if Baphomet is losing, but by his freedom. A strong, but more importantly, free hunter that can go out into the world and live their own life. During this battle, a voice from the beyond calls to him, distracting him long enough to get him killed. However, on the brink of death, he gets a quest that will grant him his deepest desire if he kills the hunter Raven. On the brink of death, he stands up, on fire, rips the heart out of this hunter, killing him and completing his quest. And as the boss dies, the tower falls, and it leaves one person alive. Not Raven the Hunter, but Baphomet in his new form as a human. And that's just episode 1. Yeah, just the first episode. This series is dense because it takes the best of all the tropes in the series around it and combines it into one really dense, really fun series that somehow delivers a unique experience on the platform. Something I've talked about earlier in the video was the F to S rank trope. That kind of solo leveling rags to riches story where some adventurer who's really weak through some magical means becomes insanely powerful. But I actually prefer the opposite story. The fall from grace stories, the S to F rank stories. When a hunter loses all their powers and has to figure out a way to climb their way back to the top. Series like my absolute personal favorites, Hardcore Leveling Warrior, and even the really fun dungeon cleaning life of a once genius hunter. Oh boy, I forgot how long that title was. We follow less than good people who, through some unfortunate situation, lose everything, and we follow their climb back up to who they once were as they learn that they failed as human beings before, how their actions were often morally gray at best and truly awful at worst. These types of series aren't about action or about combat, granted they're usually great at that. Instead, they're stories about personal growth and development, becoming a better person than the one they were before. If you want a story more focused on a character growing and becoming better, watching the main character, who is usually a bad person, borderlining villain, get redeemed, then these stories are so amazing. However, I Was the Final Boss is an interesting twist on that twist, which is somehow another twist, as Baphomet weirdly did want that. Most of the time, it's some unfortunate or tragic event that makes our main character fall from grace. Either a literal game-breaking bug glitch thing to a conspiracy to kill the strongest hunter. They usually didn't want what happened to them. Meanwhile, Baphomet kind of did. That was his quest. Sure, he wanted to be strong as well, but more than anything, his deepest desire was to be free. He wanted to be human. Granted, he really did want to be strong, but apparently becoming human had stripped him of all of his strength and powers, having no skills or anything. He was weak, not in terms of normal humans, but in terms of hunters, not being able to take down any boss, any dungeon, any monster. And after people try to test his strength and he gets absolutely wrecked, he needs to pay for those medical bills. The American healthcare system. And is forced to work in the dungeon mines. The American healthcare system. Kind of like how the dungeon cleaning life of a once genius hunter focuses on the life of dungeon cleaners. Baphomet, now weak and human, does what I call the mundane and the extraordinary, focusing on a less than spectacular thing in a world that is spectacular, accidentally picking so many fights that he basically becomes the gang leader in a mine, getting his own little group, and while he hates how powerless he is, while hanging out with this group, he realizes that he can have fun, experience joy, all all without fighting. And right when he's about to open up, right when he's actually having a good time, an explosion takes out his entire group. The moment he's actually enjoying the freedom and the happiness that he's been dreaming of, it gets violently ripped from him. And he gets mad. So mad that a hidden quest is completed. Feel rage for the sake of a human. As a reward, he gets the powers he desires, gaining enough strength to brutally murder the hunters that caused the explosion, and avenging his fallen allies by slicing off the limbs of the leader for the death he's caused. Like I said, this series is brutal and I love it. Our main character doesn't hold back. He doesn't pretend to be this grand, virtuous hero that will save the day. He was the final boss of a monster dungeon, and he still has that energy in him. And he shows it, and it is great. Look, say what you want to say about the isekai space. I think there are a lot of valid complaints about them. There are too many of them, they're all the same, they're overdone, whatever your complaint is, it's valid. I don't typically cover series that are brand new. However, after reading literally just the first chapter, I knew I had to cover this series. We don't just follow some morally gray person, not even just some villain. We follow the villain, the final boss, and more importantly, follow his growth. Following him actually start to care for others. Not just fighting, or not just some items, or not just some toys, but actual people. Getting so mad that he literally tortures a guy for killing his friends. So enraged that the system gives him the power to fight back. So please, check out I Was the Final Boss, updating every week on Webtoon.